Hi friends, Mark and Bear Hobbies, welcome back to the channel. Brand new build, we're building the Grumble. Yes, probably 90% of you are probably thinking, what the heck is a Grumble? Okay, Grumble is the NATO code word that was given to the legacy Soviet, now Russian air defense system. What we're looking at is this vehicle, which is part of a Grumble air defense system, which would include a radar, tracking radar, search radar, and this is the Transporter Erector Launcher vehicle. So basically the vehicle that carries the missiles, has the launch tubes. These launch tubes go up and then it fires the missile out the targets. Of course, read up on the history about these systems, very interesting. We're going to look at the build. Why did I choose this? First of all, Modelcollect. Interested to see about them. I don't see a lot of them reviewed or built either on the internet and particularly on YouTube. 1/72 scale. Quite a challenging kit in 1/72 scale, lots of detail. If we have a look at the vehicle itself, it's a MAZ chassis vehicle, typical 8-wheel drive, 8-wheeled all-terrain vehicle that's used on a number of different platforms. And this one in this S300 configuration has this command cabin and the launch tubes on the back. Now, what I remember is that Trumpeter brought out the MAZ chassis earlier, quite a long time ago. I did build that in 1/35, and what I can remember about that kit, quite complex suspension. So we're going to see how the kit goes together, what it looks like, and of course, we're going to see what we can do with it to make it a little bit more interesting. So stay tuned as we go throughout the video. Hope you enjoy. Okay, so let's crack on and open up the box, see what's inside this kit. Nice bit of box art on the front. And let's flick through the instructions just to see what we're embarking on. Get a bit of history on the vehicle, parts tree. And you can see straight away a lot of fine detail parts, and obviously it does look a bit complex when you first open up the instructions, I must say. Now just pay attention to that, that's showing you building up the parts in situ. We ain't going to do that. There's some really nice colour call outs as well to boot, some really nice schemes there. Oh, the sprues are individually bagged. And as I found out, most of the parts are the actual suspension. Nice slide molded cab, really nice detail on there. There's the launch tubes, and you get 2 frets of photo etch from this kit. A few close-ups of the detail, you can see it's really nicely rendered. The parts were excellent. There was no flash, no cleanup required on the parts. Decal sheet as well, some markings. Let's cut the sprues. Yeah, I use these small sanding sticks, these fine ones, really kind of handy for these 72 scale parts. And you do get a little engine. I'm just going to point out here, you're going to see this a lot. I used a metal rule, a straight edge, throughout this build. You can see there that one of the chassis runs, see, it isn't exactly true, so just bear that in mind. You're going to make some adjustments as you build it. There's that engine all built up. Quite nicely detailed, but you ain't going to see it. This is sort of the first page of the instructions, and I've laid out all these transmission components as they are on the instructions. And you can see how much there is that's going to get crammed in there. So basically sort of go through, started from one end,
followed the instructions and just placed all the parts in one by one. Obviously just used one of the chassis rails, so basically everything was mounted to one chassis rail. And keep dry fitting as you go through. That's really the key with this one. You can see there's a lot that gets mounted on here. This is really the bulk of the build. It is actually the underneath of the vehicle, which really isn't seen, but you know, props to Modelcollect for taking it on. It's good that the detail's not being sacrificed here. All that transmission parts, you know, really well replicated in 72 scale. Now, once you've sort of got this together, you've basically got a lot of the build out the way, really. Just keep test fitting. I mounted a few bits right at the end, like these differentials and the drive shafts. Just added them in at the end. And of course, checking the alignments again. You see this part, this is the connecting on the drop arms. Now the instructions sort of show you to build up the wheels and the drop arms and then put them on. Don't recommend that. I recommend you put on those swing arms, mount on the lower section, then top section, and then put the wheels on, and you've got a much better chance. I'm using a snipper there, the sprue cutter rather, take off the pins on those drop arms because they sort of have it as if it's nearly working. Well, it is not working, it's not feasible at all on that scale. So I recommend you trim them off so you can get a really good join of the wheels to those drop arms. Yeah, make sure of course that the wheels themselves are true as well after that they are installed. Check it all the time. And these are the sort of mounting points for the bed, the payload bed, which is just getting trimmed out the sprue now. And hydraulic ram that functions. Chose to mount the wheels at this stage. You'll see why in a minute. And just building up that payload bed really, which is it's only a few parts really that's involved. I think I had to compress the parts as I glued them together to make sure that they really trued up. And I used the Tamiya liquid cement throughout the build, the extra thin. Nothing else really required on this build. Now this next part, these are the launch tube holder, the sort of the device, the hydraulic ram and the erector. And you see it functions if you build it up correctly. There's a smidge of putty just on the back where these, I don't know what you'd call it, it's sort of the mounting point for the actual missile tubes, I would say. Okay, now there was something a little bit amiss with these parts. They're meant to go together with something in the middle of them. However, the parts are missing, so don't worry, we solve that later on. And this is the command cab. Okay, nothing special here, really straightforward. And I was checking the fit all the time. Now I recommend with the cab also was to be built in situ. The instructions show you that, but you see this part that I'm inserting now, really if you try and do that in situ, you're going to have a devil of a job. So I recommend you build up the cab as a whole beforehand. Test fit all the modules. Make sure you're happy with everything. It's really critical. Now we're just building up launch tubes and we're building up one missile. There is all the missiles are supplied, and the instructions show you building them and then putting them inside the tubes. So if you're one of those guys that like stuff that you need to know that it's there, well, this is the model kit for you. And this is the upper half of that part that I was telling you about. Just a little bit of photo etch. It's really this engine grill. At least they got that detail. And I've sort of mounted on the tyres just temporarily, just to make sure they don't interfere with the arches of the cab. And this is the way I put on the cab. That engine, I trimmed it all out and removed it so I could slip the cab on and slide it on. So I got a really nice firm join. And that's really basically it together. Now, those missing parts, just take some sprue. I use some sprue, cut it to the right length. And this is what fills in that missile holder, or whatever you call it. A few extra details get added on. And wing mirrors, they're really tiny details in this photo etch step as well. To tidy up the launch tubes, just started to use my X-Acto knife, scraping along the seam to start off with before it was all polished. And we're basically priming it. So this is black primer, really the way you'll see me go out throughout the builds. Maybe I should do something different where I don't use black primer, and we'll consider that in another build. But you know, I like a nice either a black or a dark brown base coat. Just get all those shadow areas laid in, and with all that difficult suspension work, you don't want any bare plastic showing through. Using Mr. Color throughout this build. Mr. Color paints, using the two Russian greens that are from Mr. Color. They're lacquer paints, they're using lacquer thinner. So let's sort of shade in. I think I started up with the Russian green 2, which is the darker of the shades. And it lays down really nicely with the lacquer thinner. Of course, with the lacquer paints, you need a respirator. It's a satin sort of finish that you get with these paints, straight out the jar. I like that shade. I've used it a lot. We use 135, which is the Russian green 1. Just a little bit of shading within the sort of panel sections. Break it up, give it a little bit of interest. I mean, we've got a monotone model here basically, so we aren't going heavy weathering. You're going to see that later on, but let's create a bit of shading, a bit of visual interest, remove that monotone appearance. So the easiest way to do this is adding some shading, color modulation, whatever you want to call it. And there she is. Basically the base coats are on. I left the wheel hubs in the black primer because they're black, nothing special required there. And the launch tubes, just get a simple white coat. Again, I use Mr. Color on this. Mr. Color, the white color from them. Just painted all these launch tubes. Takes a few coats to lay this down. Keep your coats nice and light. And a few decals or decals to go on the model. Very simple, which is basically, I think, 1 red star on the door and 2 registration decals. I just follow them straight from the instructions. Use Mr. Mark fit to lay them out. Using toothpick there just to help with alignment. And just bedding in that decal. Yeah, I had a bit of Mr. Mark setter. Like I said, Mr. Color throughout because they do not interfere with one another. Okay, gloss coat went straight onto the decals. Gloss coat prior to weathering on this model kit. You see a nice shiny appearance. Everything's protected, and we're going to use Mr. Weathering Color products for the whole weathering process. See, they have their own solvent for weathering, and I'm adding that into a dish. You know, a couple of drops. I actually used a small Q-tip or cotton bud just to take the solution out of the dispenser bottles. There's an agitator bottle included within the Mr. Weathering colours. So good shake up first. And I'm mixing black with the ground brown, I think it was called, or weathered brown. Sort of make a very dark black brown colour. And we're pin washing on this solution straight onto that varnish. It really is an excellent system, totally compatible. The thinner will not dissolve the varnish that we applied on beforehand, and you'll see why I use a gloss coat as we progress this. You've got plenty of time to work with this solution. When you've got a gloss coat on, the pin wash will flow very easily using capillary action. Got some depth on there. We repeat the process on the MAS TEL. There's lots of little details on here that you can capture, and you want to pin light and highlight them using this technique. It's adding shading, and of course you're highlighting the detail by adding depth. One thing with the Mr. Weathering solution is you've got plenty of time to work with it. Because of that gloss coat, you have got plenty of time. Want a nice bit of depth in that radiator. And we're using the solvent with some cotton buds. Just show you how the cleanup goes. You can use them bare or just barely dampen them with the thinner, and just remove the excess, sort of clean it up, get it nice and tight to the detail. There you can see I'm dampening the Q-tip or the cotton swab, and then using the dry end of that cotton swab again just to clean up the detail. And that was repeated, of course, on the actual on the chassis of the vehicle. This is a pretty good shot here. You can see the wash is matte against the gloss of the vehicle, so it's a really quite easy to pick up the excess and clean it up. You can see that Q-tip getting darker and darker as you pick up the excess wash from all the recessed details. And the solvent, of course, no counter reaction, no bad reaction at all with that gloss coat. Should really try it just on the bare paint, just to see what happens, but this is a technique that's used here. Really easy, really straightforward, nothing too complex. Remember, frontline vehicles, they aren't tanks. These things are delicate, well, not delicate, but you know, they're frontline equipment. They aren't left to rot in the field, so keep the weathering constrained. We're really talking about highlighting detail. That's what we did in this process. Now I used a bit of this sand wash again, the Mr. Weathering colours, mixed it up. Actually put on some neat as well, just sort of dabbed it on the bed, and took a large soft brush and just sort of blended it out. So okay, a little bit of dirt effects just to create a bit of visual interest on there, you know, nothing over the top. This isn't a massively dirty vehicle, keeping it quite clean. Now let's add some masking. Just rip up a piece of paper. Obviously it doesn't need to be yellow, just sort of highlight it out onto you. There's the doors temporarily sort of tacked in place. And a bit of blue tack. I'm going to hold the mask into position. This is a mask for weathering, so we're just going to create a dust effect just on the lower extremities of the chassis. Just added in that neat, diluted down. I applied it neat to the rubber of the wheels. There is rubber wheels on here. And this mask, it prevents the overspray, and it confines that weathering just to the lower part of the chassis. You can see that on the wheels I can just clean it up straight away. I didn't need to use a damp or anything, but that way the dust is just in the tread. Nice little effect. Use a feather brush, dampen it up with some of the thinner again. Remove the excess, kind of important for this. And we're just fading and dragging down that that dust effect, sort of blending it out, creating a few streaks, making it a little bit more natural and homogeneous with the overall look of the vehicle. Any oversplash, just cleaned up with a cotton swab. Put the tyres on at this stage. They could all be added on later. The instruction shows you add them on first, but there you go. That's basically it. And then we go on to the matte finish. Matte finish from Mr. Colour again. So now, take off the mask. This was the only transparent part I had to mask. I put it in prior to the weathering, and then I could add in all the transparencies after that matte coat. So it was really easy, you know, there wasn't any need to mask everything. Just fixing in the doors now, cementing them in. I use this liquid chrome from Modelcollect to add the chrome to the hydraulic struts. Just wanted to try this out, can really recommend it. I mean, it's the easiest way to apply chrome, and a base for the headlights as well. Just removing those toothpicks that were holding the launch tubes while I painted them. Obviously I pinned them on a place that couldn't be seen. Now we've mounted on the launch tubes. There's the hydraulic strut. Yes, it does sort of function, but we don't really need it for that. Let's build up the missile. Got an acrylic rod here, and this acrylic rod worked out to be the perfect diameter to sort of insert into the back of the missile. And then I took a launch tube. It's got a piece of sprue that I put down the middle, measured the internal diameter, and then I took a few spare, like some spare transparent sprue. And what I'm building up now is a support for this acrylic tube, which is really going to be hiding the launch of the missile. I'm just sort of checking the fit there. Just checking out what sort of length it's going to be outside of the tube. And I've got these little battery powered LED lights. That's all I'm going to use. No wiring, nothing complex. Just hollowing out the tube there. Just checking the fit. Super glue in the light, which is push to turn on and pull to turn out. So just checking all that out. Yeah, I'm just marking out the correct position for that tube. I mean, this is really simple, but, you know, nice to sort of add a little effect like that. You know, without wiring or anything, it's really easy to do. And just testing again the fit. That sort of holds in dry, there's no need to cement it. And I decided to replace the photo etch fins of these missiles with some styrene, just a personal choice really. Just showing you basically scribing out the sheet styrene. It's really thin, it's as thin as the photo etch, and of course cementing in is a lot easier. So I might cut out 4 of those to match the photo etch fins. And of course you're going to get a better bond as well, you know, rather than using super glue. So that was really the reason I did that. Those are the fins on the missile. Let's do a base. All pre-packaged stuff this. You can get these terrain bases anywhere. Just check the vehicle that it sits on there nicely. Measure out the base and cut it out. Just trim it off, make sure it's the right size. Use a bit of super glue and just applied it down onto that wood base and weigh it down with some paint and your favorite magazines. And then For the vehicle to sit on there properly, I roughed out some tracks, you know, obviously, you know, making sure that it fitted around the vehicle. And then just use a scalpel to cut out the extra, made sure it fitted down quite nicely, which it did. And just doing a few detail paints. This is transparent orange, transparent red. Use the toothpick here just to add these details to the lights, the indicator lights, the positioning lights on the vehicle. There's no transparencies for these lights, so just sort of add them in with paint. And here's a bit of a highlighting technique that we used. Use some very light green oil paints, and we're dry brushing. Yeah, dry brushing with oil paint, so dry brushing is not dead. And we're doing that to add some further sort of highlighting of those panels. You can just sort of see that it adds on a real subtle, nice little sheen to some of the centers of the panels and brings out the details. Keep it real subtle though. Now, these are Mr. Weathering liners. So I had these a while, thought I'd try them out on this build. They are sort of like pencil crayons, I could best describe them as. I sharpened up the tip to make them really fine. And why not use this to add some little small scratches, you know, really subtle. If you're sort of learning weathering, that might be a really good alternative to you. Now let's create the launch effects. Bit of cotton wool. First of all, spray painted it with this yellow with an acrylic. Just making sure that I'm not going to obscure that light. Bit of super glue, and then glue on that cotton wool. And then there's another bit super glue to the bottom. And then we took a very dark, it was like a black brown mixture in acrylics, and you know, lightly oversprayed the yellow and the bottom to sort of create that sort of smoky effect. Bit of wash on the missile, let's not leave that out. Just highlighting the details, very few on there. Painting the missiles in bright silver, but you know, I had a look online, they're white, nothing that special. And to sort of blend that in, we added, to blend in the vehicle at the base, just lightly airbrush the weathering colour on both the tracks, and we sort of topped up those wheels to sort of make everything fit together. And that's basically most of everything done there. A really simple little build. Just attach on the missile. And it's complete. Okay, so just before the reveal, let's just recap on the build. That kit, Modelcollect, really excellent. The end result, a lot of detail. A little bit complex, so maybe not a beginner kit, but you would enjoy building it, especially if you want to maybe want a little bit more of a challenge in your builds. In 1/72 scale, I think it looked great. There was a few issues that we had to sort out, but we overcame them by basically just having this sort of experience. So I hope that this guide to the construction will help you if you go ahead and build one of these mass chassis vehicles from Modelcollect in the 172 range. And then when we went through the weathering, we kept the weathering quite light. We didn't do any chipping or anything like that because we want to reflect a vehicle that's sort of frontline Russian service, not really deteriorated. So we used actually a system. We used Mr. Color throughout. We used Mr. Color paints. We used their lacquer varnishes, and we used their weathering system. And the reason we did that is because one of the common questions that's asked is basically, if I use this thinner with this paint and I've used this varnish with this varnish, is there a counter reaction? Does anything possibly deteriorate the finish? Well, simply put, if you use a system such as Mr. Color, so use their varnish and then you use their thinners and their weathering solutions, they are all compatible, so you're not going to get a bad reaction. And the base as well, very simple, very straightforward. So really that concludes the video. Thanks a lot very much for all the subscribers and people joining the channel. Of course, please leave your comments for any improvements, and really let's look forward to the next build. So see you soon.